Hello and welcome. In today's video, we're going to make a comparison that many of you have been requesting and asking about. After all, which Switch emulator currently delivers the best performance? We'll be testing 20 console-exclusive games and showing which one achieves the highest raw performance. We chose the settings for each project prioritizing the maximum performance they can offer, even if in some cases it meant sacrificing a bit of visual quality. In Ryubing, we set CPU accuracy to unsafe, and in this emulator there are basically no more adjustments to improve overall performance. In Eden, we set the CPU tick to 50,000, CPU accuracy to unsafe, enabled RAI for better performance, and in the even veil options, we went with only EDS3, which doesn't make much difference on Windows, but since they advertise it as an improvement, we enabled it. In Citron, CPU accuracy was also set to unsafe. We used FSR2 and MCA, and the FSR2 preset was set to ultra performance. One feature in Citron and Eden I preferred to keep the way I like is allowing them to use VRAM and RAM to the max, since I have 12 GB of VRAM and 32 GB of RAM. That won't be a problem for me and can even help avoid stutters and performance drops, as I showed in an older video I used as a reference. The first game tested was Astral Chain, using the 60 FPS mod. In general, this mod breaks cutscene audio in most projects, but it greatly improves gameplay quality of life, as an action game at 30 FPS is not very enjoyable. Speaking of raw performance, which is the focus here, Ryubing has a significant advantage. Keep in mind the gameplay is sped up and no one will actually play at this speed, but if your game needs just a few extra FPS to reach 60, that choice can be essential. Comparing Citron and Eden, the difference is about 5 FPS, but looking at the 1% low, Eden shows many more stutters. Another point is RAM usage, which is about 2 GB higher in Ryubing, even though it uses less VRAM. Moving on to Bayonetta 2, we had high FPS numbers in all tests, but with clear differences. Ryubing came last with almost 180 FPS, while the Yuzu forks performed far better. Eden reached 238 FPS and Citron went even further with 249 FPS, showing impressive performance from the Yuzu forks. Again, Ryubing used more RAM than the others. Bayonetta 3 comes with some important caveats before talking about performance. This game suffers from cutscene delays that can make it unplayable. Fortunately, Yuzu forks like Citron and Eden almost no longer have this issue, but Ryubing still does. Another negative for Ryubing is the lack of support for mods such as translations for unsupported languages or changing the Switch button layout to DualShock. If you apply these mods, the emulator will not work properly. As for raw performance, it doesn't mean much here because of Ryubing's desync issue. Still, Ryubing averaged 116 FPS, Citron got 80, and Eden got 75 FPS. Once again, Ryubing consumed more RAM. The next game tested was Bowser's Fury, a short and very fun title. If you have a rainy afternoon, it's worth playing from start to finish. It has solid performance, and is excellent for benchmarking. Again, Ryubing fell behind, with a difference of almost 50 FPS compared to Citron, which was the fastest and also beat Eden by nearly 25 FPS. As expected, Ryubing showed higher RAM usage. Metroid Dread is a game that fully uses the GPU, making the emulators show very high FPS rates. Despite having simple graphics, most of the time in 2.5D, we got interesting results: 297 FPS on Ryubing, for 26 on Citron, and 589 on Eden, which was the first to use almost all GPU resources. Once again, Ryubing used more RAM but much less VRAM. In Metroid Prime Remastered, there were also considerable performance differences, but all ran above expectations. Citron came last with 253 FPS, Eden followed with 288 FPS, and Ryubing led with 319 FPS. This time, none of the projects had unusual RAM usage. I was going to test Fire Emblem Engage, but there are issues running gameplay while capturing benchmarks, as the game cannot calculate the XP gained if it's sped up. Since this is an issue with the game itself, the benchmarks should be considered only experimental, as any attempt to modify the game results in a softlock. But if you want to know which fork has the best performance, the result points to the Yuzu forks. However, I've always heard reports that this game has issues later on, so further testing is needed. Before we start the Pokémon franchise, a quick message from our sponsors. If you want to support the channel, buy any game through the Instant Gaming links. If you want to buy original games while saving a lot, check out Instant Gaming. the digital store that sells games for various platforms, such as PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo Switch. Get games of all genres with discounts of up to 95%. You'll also find a variety of gift cards and credits for other services. You can pay for your order through your credit card on a website with a 4.7 rating on Trustpilot. You're buying games directly from Instant Gaming, not from other retailers. If you encounter any issues, Instant Gaming offers 24/7 support. And this month, Instant Gaming is offering a special discount on Wuchang, with a price at least $10 cheaper than on Steam, making it the lowest price ever for the game. What are you waiting for to save? Links in the description. So let's move on to the Pokémon franchise, which overall already has most of its games playable on most PCs. Starting with Pokémon Let's Go, one of the lightest Switch games, it will be the only one on this list to run at 720p due to the requirement of using handheld mode. Here, we had our first tie, with an average of 199 FPS on both Citron and Eden. Ryubing was far behind, showing only about 50% of the performance with 99 FPS at the time of testing. One highlight goes to Ryubing's VRM usage, which is much lower than the Yuzu forks. Pokémon Scarlet, one of the most problematic in the franchise due to its per-Switch port, which was never properly fixed, shows higher performance and accuracy on Ryubing, reaching 85 FPS in the city. Citron came in second with 64 FPS, and Eden last with 58 FPS. As I mentioned, the goal here was to test raw performance, but if you choose unsafe CPU accuracy, as I did in these tests, you will see several vertex explosions. To fix this, you need to use accurate CPU accuracy, which may slightly reduce performance. These issues were not detected in Citron and Ryubing. Pokémon Sword was one of the titles that required the most work to optimize on these emulators. It took years after its release before it was possible to play it from start to finish without major issues. Today, we can finally enjoy the game in its entirety. In terms of performance, Citron takes the lead with 141 FPS, followed by Ryubing with 134 FPS, and lastly Eden, with only 102 FPS, almost 40% lower than the first place. In Pokémon Legends Arceus, Citron and Eden tied. However, looking at Ryubing's performance, there's a substantial gain of almost 40 FPS compared to the Yuzu forks. In this game, if you use unlocked FPS, the game speeds up, which can be useful for things like shiny hunting or crossing large areas faster. Princess Peach Showtime was the opposite of Pokémon Legends Arceus, with the Yuzu forks taking the lead. I've heard reports of a specific stage where the game doesn't work on these forks, but as I've never progressed that far, I can't confirm. For those who like high frame rate games, this title is great because since it works with dynamic FPS, increasing the frame rate does not speed up the game. Super Mario 3D World also pushed our GPU to the limit, and this time Eden stood out with 60 FPS more than the competition. Other metrics worth noting are Ryubing's heavy RAM usage and its low 1%, which was around 280 FPS, proving that overall, shader compilation on Ryubing is worse than on the Yuzu forks. For Super Smash Bros., we tested both performance and shader compilation at the same time. Since this game suffers from many simultaneous shaders, we ran a match with 8 CPU-controlled characters on screen. The result showed Citron can be much more powerful in this game, while Eden and Ryubing were almost tied. Looking at the low 1% metrics, which indicate stutters during shader compilation, Citron was the winner with 21 FPS, followed by 8 and 7 FPS for the competitors. Eden's RAM usage is impressive, with 2 GB less allocated than the others. Super Mario Wonder, in addition to being a title from the final years of the Switch's lifecycle, uses an engine considered lightweight in terms of performance, since the game is almost entirely in 2.5D. Speaking of performance, Ryubing delivers the worst result among the three, although it's still far from being considered bad. Meanwhile, both Citron and Eden managed to surpass the 300 FPS mark. And of course, we also have the game everyone should experience on the console, Super Mario Odyssey. In addition to being one of the Switch's launch titles, it can still present some challenge for more modest PCs, especially in areas with high hardware demand. Here, Ryubing takes the lead, followed by Citron and then Eden, with a difference of almost 15 FPS between them. It's worth noting that you don't need to play Odyssey above 60 FPS to have a great experience, but since the focus here is raw performance, the comparison is still valid. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 unfortunately has a 60 FPS cap due to the mod, and there's no way to unlock it. It would have been interesting to have a full comparison here because of its large open world, but all we could get was the same 60 FPS across all three projects. Ryubing shows a low 1% than the Yuzu forks, as well as slightly higher RAM usage but lower VRAM usage. Before we test the games you've been most looking forward to, the Zelda franchise, don't forget to leave a like to support this video, which is very time-consuming to produce. And if this is your first time on the channel, consider subscribing to catch upcoming releases. Let's start with Zelda Breath of the Wild. For the love of God, do not run this game on Nintendo Switch emulators. Instead, use Cemu, which will deliver better performance, especially on entry-level PCs. Also, the game's customization capabilities on Cemu are much better. Use Switch emulators only to play Breath of the Wild on Android, until Cemu for Android has evolved enough. But since we're here to judge only performance, Ryubing came in first place, followed by Citron, then Eden. Now, before showing Zelda, Echoes of Wisdom's performance, we need to talk about some issues. Basically, the visual problems no longer occur in any emulator, but when it comes to audio, it's a different story. On the Yuzu forks, there are severe audio issues. The gameplay you're seeing now was captured on Ryubing, and all the audio is playing correctly. However, when switching to Citron or Eden, audio glitches appear that will probably make you want to mute the game during the rifts. Speaking only of performance, Eden does best, followed by Citron, then Ryubing. But here, it's worth evaluating whether your PC can run Ryubing so that you can have a more pleasant overall experience. Lastly, and certainly not least, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. After the CPU emulation improvements that the Yuzu forks received, Ryubing's performance was completely overshadowed by them, in addition to its absurd RAM usage of more than 20 GB. This alone will make some of you instantly opt for the Yuzu ports. Speaking just about the Yuzu forks, Citron once again does better, with about a 5 FPS advantage. Overall, we notice that Citron has slightly better performance in most games, but performance isn't everything. While Citron is also getting core improvements and optimizations for Unreal Engine games, Eden has also been evolving a lot. And if we compare improvements or the playable game library, Eden will probably win in that regard. However, all the tab configurations like CPU tick and Eden Veil can drive away those who just want to come home and play without complex tweaks. They are creating a database to suggest the best settings, but for now, it's not fully functional and contains only a few cataloged games. In the case of Ryubing, all the accuracy the emulator offers can, in some cases, generate slightly better performance, but overall it falls behind in most games. Besides that, mod support is a bit more limited compared to the Yuzu forks. So you might be wondering, which fork should I use? That's still a tricky question since we're waiting for the official releases, Eden 0.0.3 and Citron 0.7. But if I had to choose an emulator right now, focusing on performance and usability, for playing only the exclusive games tested here, I would choose Citron. On the other hand, if the goal was to play many titles, especially in Unreal Engine, I might opt for Eden because of its new compatibility. Keep in mind, however, that finding all the best settings can be more work, and shader compilation on Eden is currently slower than on Citron, but still faster than on Ryubing. This is just my experience. Try it yourself and let me know in the comments which one you preferred. I'll leave the link to the tested version of Eden, as well as to the stable and nightly versions of Ryubing. Unfortunately, Citron's version is still restricted to testers, and I need to wait for the public release before sharing it with you. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.